Good evening on this Tuesday night as this country and the world now reacts to another series of deadly terror attacks. Tonight, the urgent manhunt right now after the city of Brussels is rocked with multiple explosions at the airport and then in the subway. Americans among the injured, among those trapped, and you'll hear from them tonight. Authorities now putting out this image. 3 suspects at the airport, 2 of them believed to be the suicide bombers. The third man on the right, they believe, is on the run at this hour. We will analyze what else is in that photo. The first blasts at the airport, afterwards smoke and dust, the injured crying for help. And then on the subway in the center of the city, the next explosion, a subway car incinerated at rush hour. You can hear the cries, passengers running in the dark. Tonight, at least 31 killed, more than 200 injured. We have team coverage here, and we begin with ABC's Alex Marquardt on the scene, taking us through the terrifying moments and the investigation now.
Tonight, terror striking in the heart of Europe. Belgium's main airport, a smoky war zone. The city paralyzed. The attackers hit at the height of rush hour. Those 3 men, police believe, walking into the busy airport. Around 8 a.m., 2 blasts. Suicide bombers in the departure hall outside the security checkpoint. The terminal filled with smoke and the sound of screams. Travelers lying on top of each other on the floor. This man holding a little girl.
Stay down.
People huddled in fear. And then the questions.
What it was? A job or was it a terrorist?
This man picked his small baby up off the floor before running to safety. The bomb so powerful that ceilings collapsed. The wounded treated amid the rubble. Airport security scanning for victims.
You have to go outside.
Okay. Ordering people to evacuate, they rush out of the terminal, glass crunching underfoot. Outside, smoke pouring out of shattered windows as people raced away.
We saw a lot of people really badly injured, with a lot of blood, and we know that it was even worse inside, but we could not see anything because of the smoke.
At least 10 dead here, and more than 100 injured, including 9 Americans, Mormon missionaries Richard Norby, Joseph Empey, and Mason Wells from Utah, and an American Air Force lieutenant colonel traveling back home with his family. But the horror was still unfolding. 9:11 a.m., just an hour after the airport explosions, 7 miles away, another bomb goes off near the offices of the European Union, this time in a packed metro car as it was leaving the station. In the dark tunnel, passengers climbed out of train cars, the terrified screams of a child. The path to safety down the dimly lit tracks. This man still clutching a bouquet of flowers. In other metro cars, people waited, confused.
More panic set in. Some people started running. Some people started crying. Some people just stood still in disbelief and tried to make sense of whatever was going on.
The car where the bomb went off, a twisted mass of metal. Outside, more smoke as the sidewalk becomes a makeshift triage center. First responders carrying some of the victims. Others sitting dazed as ambulances rush to the scene. At least 21 people dead. More than 100 wounded here, too. And at 4:19 p.m., 8 hours after the terror began, ISIS claimed responsibility. Brussels tonight, a city gripped by fear and uncertainty.
This is normally one of the busiest avenues in Brussels, just outside the European Commission here. You can see those flags back there, now flying at half staff. This road should be full of cars now at rush hour. Instead, as you can see, it's eerily empty, shut down by police.
The threat level here raised to the highest level. Police now looking for this man, the third suspected bomber. Police choppers in the air, residents told to stay inside, watching from windows as officers patrol rooftops.
More breaking news just coming in. This one from the Associated Press, and I'll read the exact wording that just moved over AP's urgent wires. Dateline Paris. Islamic State has dispatched hundreds of trained fighters to attack across Europe in a deadly wave, the AP has learned. Associated Press has reported in the last minute that security officials say up to 400 attackers are now trained for missions in Europe. We're waiting for more details on this. Again, the breaking news now from Associated Press, 400 attackers have been fanned across Europe and are ready and trained for attacks here across the continent. Yesterday's attack in Brussels marks the third large-scale terror attack in Europe in the past 15 months. That's because many of those who become radicalized are recruited right here on these very streets.
This is yet another reminder that the world must unite. We must be together, regardless of nationality or race or faith, in fighting against the scourge of terrorism.
If you were president of the United States, what would you do specifically to make sure that the kind of terror attack we saw today in Brussels, what we saw in November in Paris, what else needs to be done here in the United States?
Well, we have to toughen our surveillance, our interception of communication.
There is tightened security at airports and rail stations around the world in response to the Brussels attacks.
Across Europe, heavily armed police flooded into public places and set up checkpoints on normally open borders, while politicians, including Britain's David Cameron, spoke of solidarity.
And we need to stand together against these appalling terrorists and make sure they can never win.
In Paris, security patrols were reinforced in the French capital's two main airports. Additional police forces have been deployed to control trains coming from Belgium. Germany police have increased security on airports, railway stations, and the borders with Belgium, France, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Spain has maintained its terror alert at level 4, which has been there since Paris attacks in last November. Security measures have also been beefed up in other European countries such as Britain, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Italy, Greece, Poland, Slovakia, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Czech. The attacks have also provoked tightened security in the United States.
Just before rush hour this morning, New York City deployed an army of counterterrorism officers from 3 elite units, including its Hercules team, specially trained to protect the city's most sensitive targets and transportation hubs. New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton.
The timing of this event allowed us to hold over the morning tours of duty on all of those units, so we were able to literally double the amount of officers available to us this morning.
Thousands of commuters filed past heavily armed officers and were stopped to have their bags searched.
It's comforting. Very grateful to all of them.
In Los Angeles, police presence was beefed up at Union Station, the largest rail terminal on the West Coast. Los Angeles Police Chief Charlie Beck.
We want to have a high visibility. We want to make sure that our critical infrastructure is safe.
In Chicago, police had K-9 units on the platform as trains arrived. And in Washington, D.C., the Metro Police Chief consulted with the FBI this morning to make sure her officers were doing all they could to protect passengers. Mary Battle and her family, visiting from Florida, witnessed the show of force in Times Square.
I'm hoping that with the extra security here that this is going to be one of the safest days.
Now, Elaine, while there is a constant armed presence here in Times Square, the NYPD announced today that it is amping up its patrols, which its sole presence or sole focus is to really patrol the city's busy underground subway system.
think what they're doing is perfect. I think what they're doing is making everybody feel safe.
Passengers track trigger 1.1 regional service to Washington, D.C. Scheduled to depart at 9:35.
I feel fairly secure. Just seeing the people walking around with like dogs and people in uniform really helps me feel safer.
The attacks in Brussels are raising new concerns about travel security. A pair of explosions at Brussels airport happened near the check-in desk in the departures hall. That's outside the more secure area where travelers pass through security screeners. Experts often refer to these locations as soft targets. Chris Van Cleve is inside New York's LaGuardia Airport with the debate over how to better protect these often crowded spaces. Chris, good morning.
Good morning. The TSA has raised security at major airports, but that applies to the checkpoints. The rest of the airport is up to local police. So from the time you arrive at the curb, walk into the terminal, head over to the check-in counters, this is all open to anyone, and that makes it a very attractive target.
This could be the new normal at airports across the country, stepped up security in the wake of the Brussels attacks. A team of heavily armed customs officers patrolled the sprawling Miami airport. Outside New York's JFK airport, officers checked vehicles as they arrived at the terminal. And the busy Denver airport was evacuated for a time Tuesday to investigate a security threat near the American Airlines counter. Travelers admit the whole situation is unnerving.
Any day there's an attack, I think it makes you a little bit more nervous.
I've never even seen like machine guns in general, and there's police officers with machine guns just like right over there.
In Brussels this 22nd of March, there was no separation between day and night. This evening, candles do what the sun could not, cut through the darkness that has fallen over this city. And in light, the world shows its unity against the terrorists. The colors of Belgium bathe the Eiffel Tower in Paris, the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, the Trevi Fountain in Rome, and in Washington this night, light shines on the most powerful symbol of freedom in the world as America honors the fallen.
This is my number one priority. I've got a lot of things on my plate, but my top priority is to defeat ISIL and to eliminate the scourge of this barbaric terrorism that's been taking place around the world.
The deadly bombings in Brussels took the lives of 34 people at least, sadly, and over 200 injured. However, President Obama spent just 51 seconds addressing the tragedy before moving on to Cuban relations and then racing off to a baseball game to sit with Derek Jeter and Raul Castro, where this happened.
But just to get relevant to what's going on right now, it's outrageous that the President of the United States is not in the Situation Room right now planning to destroy ISIS.
What do you think of the argument is it's better that he not? I talked to a Romney supporter who was saying, you know, if he came rushing back, he would look frantic. And he's going about his business like he tells people to go about his business. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's why he's a Romney supporter. That would be like Franklin Roosevelt remaining at Warm Springs when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
But that was an attack on us. You know what I'm saying?
This is an attack on one of our allies. We belong to NATO. An attack on a NATO ally.
What would you do?
An attack on a NATO ally, in case the president ever read the treaty, is an attack on the United States of America. He has an obligation to defend that country. It's just like an attack on us. I don't know if he's ever read the treaty. The president's knowledge of history is quite questionable in any number of respects.
He's always separated these. I understand that, but he is always.
He's sitting with a dictator.
Watching a baseball game.
He's sitting with a dictator watching a baseball game while innocent people are being killed in a war.
There is a huge log jam at these security areas. What is normally heavy in the morning as people are making their way, all those people who were evacuated from those public areas are now back in line, the line stretching as far as I have ever seen it. We're on the north side of the terminal, and as you know, this airport has two sides, both the south and the north. While the suspicious package was on the south side, it's created this backflow of people here on the north side.
Terminal T waiting for my flight to Chicago, and all of a sudden a number of people were running down the concourse, and we thought somebody had their flight changed. They were running to catch a gate. And then the TSA people were running after them, yelling at everybody to get out of the terminal and said that we needed to evacuate. So everybody just took off, trying to get down through the American exit down below. But part of the problem was one of the exits were closed. So everybody was trying to go through one. I saw one man fall over because he had a heart problem and he was just really stressed out. So it was a little bit crazy to say the least, but they just were trying to make sure they do the right thing, get everybody out of the terminal. After what happened yesterday, you think, well, it's not going to happen here. And then you have something like that takes place and you're running out and everybody is scared and worried and, you know, bringing children and all this. It was a pretty strange experience to go through.
The India-based airline said its New Delhi call centre received an anonymous call saying 5 of its planes travelling from the capital to different Indian cities were carrying bombs. Passengers of the Mumbai-bound plane were evacuated for security checks, while the flight to Chennai was diverted. Flights to Chandigarh, Gorakhpur and Chennai were sanitised and checked after landing. Local media reported the threat as a hoax. Security at key Indian airports has intensified in the wake of Tuesday's attacks in Belgium.
A mortar attack on a security checkpoint in Egypt's restive North Sinai's Al Arish city killed 13 policemen on Saturday. A police officer and 7 conscripts were killed when the mortar shell hit the security checkpoint in Al Safa neighborhood south of the city. A search operation to track the attackers has since been launched, but ISIL has claimed responsibility for the attack. Egypt has been facing attacks targeting its security agencies, mostly in the Sinai Peninsula. Hundreds of police and army personnel have been killed in such attacks since 2013.
Square kilometers of desert terrain. This is stomping grounds for the approximate 2,000 heavily armed ISIL operatives, described as the group's most effective branch in the Middle East. Every few days, ISIL extremists strike Egyptian military and police forces in the peninsula. They are threatening to hit Israel next.
No fence in the world can stop militants unless soldiers are guarding that fence.
Anticipating an infiltration, rocket launch, or kidnapping, special forces patrol the border fence. They change position daily based on intel updates and scan for signs of infiltration.
One of the major challenges is the Sinai Bedouin, who have sworn their allegiance to ISIL, know this desert terrain like the back of their hands, and they can navigate it without light and without maps. The solution? To counter with the same weapon.
Embedded Bedouin trackers via footprints in the combed sand can detect time of border breach and an infiltrator's weight, height, or even approximate weapon load. Antenna and radar systems provide depth and vision. Key beyond the physical, intel gathering and sharing between Egypt and Israel. The cooperative nature is seen in the close proximity between border bases and guard posts. But neither side has a solution against one of ISIL's greatest strengths.
They are very good at keeping secrets. For example, the Russian plane they exploded. Very few people knew it was being planned, even the group's higher-ups. That's why we anticipate a border attack without any advance warning.
Wow, today we're starting a brand new series taking a look at the unrest happening all over the world and how it might impact our safety right here in America. Our first installment is all about sub-Saharan Africa. Some predict it's the next frontier for terror, with extremists threatening to turn the area into a global jihad's deadliest front. Jillian Turner's here. She's a Fox News contributor, as you know, former White House Security Council staff under President Bush and President Obama, here to break it down for us. Jillian, great to see you.
You too, Brian.
All right, let's talk some interesting stuff. First off, the continent of Africa. Let's take a quick look at where the terror really manifests itself and grows like a planter's wart. So in the north portion of Africa, what's the threat?
In northern Africa, we are looking, and across parts of Central Africa, we're really looking at Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab as the biggest terror organizations, the most lethal, that are operating continent-wide. But ISIS and Al-Qaeda have also got their hooks in there as well.
All right, so here's where Al-Shabaab could be located if you're looking to find out where to avoid or where the threat is. This is where they are. So their ideology is essentially Islamic extremists, but what separates them?
Well, both Boko Haram and ISIS really believe in the establishment of an Islamic caliphate. Much like ISIS, they believe that non-Muslims should be expelled from the continent. That means they either have to be killed off or they have to be kicked out of the country.
Hence, Christians are targeted.
Exactly. All non-Muslims are targeted across the country, and they're thriving because there's these unique combinations of an impoverished population that's largely undereducated, as well as a lot of instability and armed conflict. It's perfect, ripe conditions for terrorists to take advantage of.
Let's move through East Africa.
A brief statement from the Istanbul Governor's Office said Sunday's match was cancelled following the assessment of serious intelligence, but it did not provide any details. The announcement was made on short notice, only about 2 hours before kick-off. Fans had already started to arrive for the Fenerbahce and Galatasaray match. An unconfirmed media report said there was a bomb threat at the stadium. The threat came just 1 day after a suicide bomber killed himself and 4 foreign tourists on Istanbul's main pedestrian street.
Fighting broke out on Saturday evening between separate supporting groups of the Raja de Casablanca, the home side team, despite its victory. At least 40 people were arrested for involvement in acts of vandalism. Prosecutors have launched an inquiry into the cause of the clashes.
U.S. rejects Russia's call for an emergency meeting over violations of a ceasefire in Syria. A U.S. official in Geneva has said Russian concerns over the issue are being addressed in a constructive manner. On Monday, a Russian army official proposed an urgent meeting with U.S. representatives to agree on a mechanism to control the ceasefire in Syria. The Russian military warned that Moscow will use force unilaterally to respond to any violations if the U.S. refrains from coordinating rules of engagement against the violators. Russia accuses the U.S. of foot-dragging on enforcing the ceasefire deal.
If there is no reaction from the US to our suggestion, starting March 22nd, the Russian Federation will unilaterally begin to apply the rules provided by the agreement. Military force will not be used against the groups, peaceful people and civilians as a result of the ceasefire agreement.
Lieutenant General Sergei Ratskoy said Russia had sent the U.S. a revised Syrian ceasefire agreement on March the 5th, but their consultation in Oman last week revealed a lack of readiness on the American side for discussion and approval of the text. Russia said on the weekend that further delays to finalize the deal will lead into civilian casualties, and it cited Aleppo, where 67 civilians were reportedly killed by militant fire since the truce started.
The Philippines and the United States have announced 5 different locations scattered all throughout the Philippines where U.S. troops will be stationed on a rotational basis. 4 of these locations are air bases. One of them is a military reservation. Subic and Clark, former U.S. bases, are not included on the list. Now, One of the air bases is going to be in the southern island of Mindanao, where there are terrorism concerns. Another one will be in Palawan, facing the South China Sea, where we know there are competing territorial claims that have created tensions. Now, the U.S. says it intends to give the Philippines a lion's share of the $50 million it intends to spend on improving maritime security in the region, but it also said that this deployment of U.S. troops to the Philippines will help in its ability and the speed at which it can deploy troops whenever there is a disaster in the Philippines.
Legislation will allow the Japanese Self-Defense Forces, or SDF, to engage in armed conflicts overseas and to exercise what Tokyo calls the right to collective self-defense. Now, that could allow Japan to aid its allies like the United States in war, even if Japan itself is not attacked. But Japan's pacifist constitution bans the SDF from exercising this right of collective self-defense. Last year, the Abe-led ruling coalition ran the controversial bills through the parliament. It enacted the legislation in September amid strong opposition from the Japanese public and academics due to its, what they call, its unconstitutionality.
"45 senior representatives from China and the United Kingdom. These military officials and diplomats are here to exchange their views and ideas on building a smooth mechanism for joint national evacuation operations."
通过今天的研讨，
Through today's tabletop exercise and discussions, the two sides have reached a consensus on national evacuation, which will lay a solid foundation for conducting joint evacuation operations in the future. It helps deepen our practical cooperation in the area of non-traditional security issues.
China and the UK have gained substantial experience in evacuating their overseas nationals in recent years. Both countries conducted successful operations in Lebanon in 2006, Libya in 2011, and Yemen in 2015. So there's a lot of common ground for cooperation.
I think in any situation where you're working with someone, if you understand their thinking, their policies, and how they go about their business before the event, then it means you're much more efficient when the crisis happens, and you can move smoothly into a procedure that you're both familiar with.
House will come to order. Members will take their seats.
Girls like me should never be forced to undress or shower in the presence of boys. I would imagine being born a boy but thinking you're a girl is very scary and confusing. But being a teenage girl is confusing too. What about my rights to privacy and wishes to not be exposed to young males changing and showering beside me?
It's common sense that boys should go to the boys' room and girls should go to the girls' room. I believe that God got it right in Genesis 5:2 when he said that he created them male and female.
I was denied a college education just because I'm transgender. I don't mean to be insensitive to some people that maybe have suffered sexual assaults and are fearful, but I have a right to be safe too. I have a right to be safe too.
You can check this. There have been 0 reported cases in history of men pretending to be transgender in order to do inappropriate things in women's restrooms. It just doesn't happen. The reality is that we just need to use the restroom, and it's sometimes like just not safe. In fact, it's almost always not safe.
I can't use the men's room. I won't go back to the men's room. It is unsafe for me there. People like me die there every day. Not the least of say, it freaks people out when I go to the men's room. Would you want to go to the men's room with me? I don't think so.
Pope Francis made his debut on Instagram just in time for Palm Sunday. His new account already has over 1.4 million followers. Here's Alan Pizzi.
Pope Francis abandoned his prepared Palm Sunday text to compare what he called indifference to migrants and refugees arriving in Europe to those who washed their hands of Jesus ahead of his crucifixion. Making use of the wider audience the special day provided is typical Francis. And this weekend he embraced another way to reach out, Instagram, a sign-up he called Beginning a New Journey. He picked up 1 million followers in 12 hours. The Pope already tweets in 9 languages, including Latin, to more than 25 million followers. He doesn't type his own tweets, usually quotes from his speeches, but approves every one. His Instagram pictures will be chosen by a senior media advisor, according to Deputy Vatican spokesman Greg Burke.
You're not going to see Pope Francis with a selfie stick here saying, "Welcome to my home," but he knows how that can be important. He knows the importance of getting the image out.
Pope Francis is the second most followed world leader on Twitter, behind President Obama. There's a certain irony to the leader of an institution that generally embraces change at a glacial pace, having an online following that would be the answer to the most fervent prayers of those celebrities who measure their worth in social media hits. And this for a man who labeled social media both mental pollution and a gift of God. It's one of the great enigmas of this Pope, Father Anthony Figueiredo says.
The way he acts, the way he talks, the way he reaches out to people is a great, great change. And the papacy will never be the same.
But he still hasn't made a major impact on church reform or the sex abuse scandal, Catholic writer Robert Mickens says.
I think he's been given a pass on this because he's been such a wonderful, inspiring figure, but we're now in the 4th year of the pontificate, and I think he's got to address this, or it could very much damage his pontificate.
And it will take more than the common touch and record-breaking numbers on social media.